The microphone felt heavier than it should have in my trembling hand. 200 wedding guests stared up at me from their elegant tables, their champagne glasses frozen mid-sip, their cruel laughter from 5 minutes earlier still echoing in my ears. My cousin Rachel sat in her pristine white dress at the head table, her smile faltering as she realized her pathetic single cousin was about to address her perfect wedding reception. "I have something to say," I announced, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. "Something all of you need to hear." The whispers died completely. Even the waitstaff stopped moving. In 33 years of family gatherings, I'd never taken a microphone. I'd never demanded attention. I'd always been the quiet one in the corner, the one they talked about instead of talking to. Comment mic drop if you've ever been underestimated by people who had no idea you were the one keeping their world together. This one's for everyone who stayed silent while ungrateful family members mocked the hand that feeds them. My name is Isabella Rodriguez, I'm 33 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years watching my extended family treat me like their charity case while I secretly funded half their major life events. But tonight, at Rachel's $80,000 wedding, the wedding I'd anonymously paid for, I was finally ready to tell them exactly who'd been bankrolling their dreams. The pattern had started when I was 18 and Rachel was planning her college graduation party. Her parents, my Uncle Miguel and Aunt Carmen, had been struggling financially after Miguel's construction business hit a rough patch during the 2008 recession. They wanted to throw Rachel a celebration worthy of her magna cum laude achievement from USC, but couldn't afford the venue or catering. "It's such a shame," I'd overheard Aunt Carmen telling my mother during one of their weekly phone calls. "Rachel deserves a proper celebration after everything she's accomplished. For years of perfect grades, graduating summa cum laude, accepting that prestigious marketing position in Los Angeles. But we just can't make the numbers work. $2,500 for the venue and catering might as well be $25,000 right now." The conversation had continued with Carmen explaining how they'd already borrowed money from Miguel's brother to cover Rachel's final semester expenses, how the construction business was barely staying afloat with only 2 active projects, and how they couldn't bear to tell Rachel that her graduation celebration would have to be a modest backyard barbecue instead of the elegant dinner party they'd originally planned. That night, I'd sat in my studio apartment calculating exactly how I could help without revealing my identity. I'd been working part-time as a freelance web developer while finishing my own college degree, and I'd managed to save $3,200 from various projects building websites for local businesses. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to cover Rachel's party and give her the celebration she deserved. I'd spent hours researching the venue Carmen had mentioned, figuring out their payment policies, and developing a plan that would allow me to pay anonymously without raising suspicions. Finally, I'd called the venue pretending to be a representative from USC's Alumni Association, explaining that a generous anonymous donor wanted to sponsor a graduation celebration for an outstanding student. The venue coordinator was initially skeptical, but when I provided Rachel's full name, graduation date, and academic achievements, along with immediate payment via wire transfer, they agreed to handle the arrangement without revealing the source of the funding. The party was beautiful. Rachel looked radiant in a new dress her parents had somehow managed to afford once the venue costs were covered. 50 family members and friends gathered to celebrate her achievements, enjoying premium catering and professional service in an elegant private dining room overlooking the city. "I still can't believe someone from the university was willing to sponsor this celebration," Uncle Miguel had said during his toast. "Rachel must have really impressed her professors to receive this kind of recognition." Rachel was thrilled, her parents were proud and relieved, and I sat in the back of the room watching the joy I'd helped create while keeping my role completely secret. It was the first time I'd experienced the satisfaction of anonymous generosity, and it established a pattern that would continue for the next 15 years. 2 years later, when Rachel was establishing herself in Los Angeles and struggling with credit card debt from furnishing her first apartment, I'd arranged for her to receive a promotional credit from a furniture store that covered $4,500 in purchases. I'd contacted the store directly, explained that I wanted to provide anonymous assistance to a recent graduate, and arranged for the credit to appear as a customer loyalty reward for referring friends. When I was 23, my cousin David was planning his wedding to his college girlfriend Amanda. They'd been together for 4 years, were deeply in love, and had saved diligently for 2 years to afford their dream wedding. But 6 months before the ceremony, David's father lost his job, and the family was facing financial pressure that threatened to derail the celebration. "We might have to postpone the wedding," David had confided to my mother during a family barbecue. "The venue requires final payment 8 weeks in advance, and we're still $3,000 short. Amanda's parents are contributing what they can, but it's just not enough." $3,000 was manageable from my perspective. My freelance web development business was growing steadily, and I'd started taking on larger projects for corporate clients who paid premium rates for custom solutions. But I couldn't simply offer David the money directly without raising questions about how a recent college graduate could afford such generosity. Instead, I'd created an elaborate scheme involving a fictional, small business development grant supposedly offered by the state government to support young entrepreneurs. I'd researched David's part-time landscaping business, created professional-looking documentation about his grant application, and arranged for him to receive a check that covered both the wedding expenses and some equipment for his landscaping work. The wedding was perfect. David and Amanda looked blissfully happy, their families were relieved and grateful for the unexpected financial assistance, and I watched from the congregation knowing I'd helped make their dreams possible while remaining completely anonymous. When I was 26, Aunt Sophia was diagnosed with breast cancer and faced mounting medical bills that her insurance only partially covered. The treatments were successful, but the financial impact was devastating for a single mother raising 2 teenagers on a teacher's salary. "I don't know how I'm going to manage these bills," Sophia had confided to my mother during one of their coffee meetings. "Between the copays, the medications, and taking unpaid leave for treatments, I'm looking at over $8,000 in debt that I'll never be able to repay on my teaching salary." $8,000 was significant, but my business was thriving. I'd moved beyond simple website development into comprehensive digital marketing solutions, helping businesses optimize their online presence and increase revenue through strategic internet marketing. My client base included restaurants, retail stores, and service companies throughout Southern California, and my annual income had reached 6 figures. I'd arranged for Sophia to receive assistance through a charitable foundation I'd created specifically for her situation. I'd registered the foundation legally, established proper nonprofit documentation, and arranged for her medical bills to be paid directly by the organization. To Sophia and our family, it appeared that she'd applied for assistance and been selected based on her circumstances and needs. "I never expected to be chosen for something like this," Sophia had told everyone at our next family gathering. Apparently, they help teachers and other public service workers who are facing medical hardship. "I feel so blessed that there are organizations willing to help people like me." The gratitude in her voice was overwhelming, but it was also tinged with the kind of humility that comes from accepting charity. I realized that my anonymous assistance, while helpful, was also positioning family members as recipients of external generosity rather than beneficiaries of family support. When I was 28, Uncle Carlos's restaurant was facing bankruptcy. He'd owned Carlos's Cantina for 12 years, building it from a small taqueria into a popular neighborhood gathering place known for authentic Mexican cuisine and live mariachi music on weekends. But the 2016 economic downturn, combined with increased competition from chain restaurants, had severely impacted his revenue. "I'm going to lose everything," Carlos had confided to my father during a family barbecue. "The bank wants $43,000 in back payments, plus current expenses, or they're foreclosing on the restaurant next month. 12 years of work, and it's all going to disappear because I can't compete with these corporate chains." $43,000 was a substantial sum, but I'd recently completed a major digital marketing project for a Fortune 500 company that had paid exceptionally well. My consulting business was generating over $200,000 annually, and I'd been investing aggressively in both business growth and personal savings. More importantly, I'd developed expertise in restaurant marketing through several successful projects helping independent establishments compete with chain competitors. I knew Carlos's restaurant had potential. it just needed better marketing, updated systems, and capital to weather the transition period. I'd approached Carlos indirectly through a business associate, presenting myself as an investor interested in supporting independent restaurants in exchange for partial ownership and operational input. The arrangement allowed me to provide the necessary capital while also contributing strategic guidance that would improve the business's long-term viability. "This investor wants to remain anonymous," I'd explained to Carlos through my intermediary. "But they specialize in restaurant marketing and have experience helping family-owned establishments compete with corporate chains. The investment comes with consulting support to improve operations and marketing effectiveness." Carlos was initially skeptical about accepting investment from someone he'd never met, but the alternative was losing the restaurant entirely. After reviewing the terms, which were exceptionally generous and focused more on preserving the business than maximizing investor returns, he'd agreed to the arrangement. The transformation was dramatic. With proper capital backing, updated point-of-sale systems, improved marketing strategies, and enhanced online presence, Carlos's Cantina not only survived but thrived. Revenue increased by 60% over the following 18 months, the restaurant expanded its staff, and Carlos was able to open a second location. "I don't know who this anonymous investor is," Carlos would tell everyone proudly, "but they saved my restaurant and helped me build something bigger than I'd ever imagined. They understand the restaurant business better than most people who've been in the industry for decades." Each success was gratifying but also frustrating. I was helping family members achieve their goals and overcome challenges, but my contributions remained invisible while their achievements received public recognition and celebration. Meanwhile, my own professional success was dismissed or ignored because it didn't fit their understanding of conventional career paths. By the time I turned 33, I'd spent over $340,000 helping family members through financial crises, funding their celebrations, and supporting their dreams. Money I'd earned through the software consulting business I'd built from my studio apartment, working 18-hour days to create solutions for Fortune 500 companies who paid premium rates for specialized expertise. But to my family, I was still poor Isabella, the single woman who lived alone, drove a modest car, and never seemed to have money for expensive clothes or luxury vacations. They saw my lifestyle choices as evidence of financial struggle rather than deliberate decisions to prioritize savings and business investments over material displays. My business has evolved from simple website development into comprehensive digital transformation consulting for major corporations. I specialized in helping established companies modernize their customer acquisition systems, optimize their online sales processes, and integrate digital marketing strategies with traditional business operations. The work required expertise in multiple technical disciplines: software architecture, data analytics, user experience design, marketing psychology, and business strategy development. My typical project involved spending 3 to 6 months embedded with a client's team, analyzing their existing systems, identifying improvement opportunities, and implementing technological solutions that would increase efficiency and profitability. The work was intellectually challenging and financially rewarding. My standard consulting rate was $300 per hour, and most projects generated between $75,000 and $200,000 in revenue. But explaining this work to family members was nearly impossible. When they asked about my job, I'd say I help companies improve their computer systems, which they interpreted as I fix computers for small businesses. When I mentioned working with Fortune 500 companies, they assumed I meant large companies hire me occasionally for small projects. The disconnect was frustrating but also protective. My family's inability to understand my professional success meant they couldn't ask for direct financial assistance or develop expectations about my income level. I could continue providing anonymous support while maintaining my privacy and avoiding the complicated dynamics that often emerge when family members know about significant wealth disparities. The mockery had intensified as I'd moved through my 30s without getting married or having children. At every family gathering, the questions and comments became more pointed and cruel, reflecting both genuine concern and barely concealed judgment about my life choices. "Isabella, when are you going to find a husband? Aunt Carmen would ask during holiday dinners, her tone suggesting that my single status was a personal failing rather than a choice. "You're 33 years old. If you wait much longer, all the good men will be taken. All the good men will be taken." Carmen spoke as if marriage was a limited resource competition where delay meant inevitable failure, rather than a personal decision that should be based on compatibility, readiness, and mutual attraction. "She's too picky," Uncle Miguel would add with a laugh that wasn't entirely good-natured. "Probably thinks she deserves some rich businessman when she can barely afford rent on that tiny apartment." Barely afford rent. If only Miguel knew that I owned my apartment building outright, plus 3 rental properties in different neighborhoods that generated $8,400 monthly in passive income while I focused on expanding my consulting practice. But the cruelest comments came from my own generation, the cousins I'd secretly helped achieve their dreams while they treated me like the family disappointment who served as a cautionary tale about the consequences of unconventional life choices. "At least I'm not going to die alone surrounded by cats," Rachel had said during her engagement party, loud enough for me to hear while I stood by the appetizer table. "Some people need to lower their standards or get used to being single forever." Some people. She was talking about me, the cousin who'd funded her college graduation party, her study abroad program in Barcelona, her first apartment's security deposit, and her engagement ring down payment through anonymous grants and scholarships I'd created specifically to help her achieve her goals without burdening her parents financially. "Isabella's problem is that she's never learned to be realistic about her prospects," my cousin David had added, warming to the topic with the confidence of someone who'd been married for 6 years. "She thinks she can afford to be choosy, but look at her lifestyle. She's living like a college student while the rest of us are building real lives." Building real lives. David was contrasting his married life with children against my single lifestyle, positioning his conventional choices as more mature and successful than my independent path. This from someone whose wedding I'd anonymously funded and whose current house down payment had come from a small business development grant I'd arranged through a fictional government program. The pattern was exhausting and demoralizing. I'd built a successful business, achieved financial independence, and helped family members accomplish their dreams, but my success was invisible because I'd chosen to keep it private. Meanwhile, their achievements, funded partially by my anonymous support, were celebrated publicly while my contributions remained unknown and my lifestyle choices were mocked as evidence of failure. The breaking point came 3 months before Rachel's wedding, when I overheard a conversation that revealed exactly how my family viewed my life and prospects. "I feel sorry for Isabella," Aunt Carmen was telling my mother during Sunday dinner. 33 years old, no husband, no children, living in that cramped apartment with her computer business that probably doesn't even pay the bills. Computer business. That probably doesn't even pay the bills. My computer business had generated $480,000 in revenue the previous year, but Carmen's assumption was that technology work couldn't possibly be financially successful. "She tries so hard to seem successful," Rachel had added, "but you can tell she's struggling. Did you see her car? It's like 8 years old. And she always wears the same 3 outfits to family events." The same 3 outfits. I wore modest clothing because I preferred investing money in business growth and helping family members rather than maintaining an extensive wardrobe. But Rachel interpreted my choices as evidence of poverty rather than priorities. "Maybe we should take up a collection for her," David had suggested with mock concern. "Help her afford a decent dress for the wedding so she doesn't embarrass the family photos." Help her afford a decent dress. David was suggesting crowdfunding assistance for the cousin who'd anonymously prevented his wedding venue from canceling due to unpaid deposits. The conversation had continued with increasingly cruel speculation about my financial situation, my career prospects, and my romantic future. Every assumption was wrong, but their confidence in their assessments was absolute. That night, I'd made a decision that would change our family dynamic permanently. Instead of continuing to provide anonymous support while enduring public mockery, I would attend Rachel's wedding and reveal exactly who'd been funding their lifestyle improvements. But first, I had to fund Rachel's wedding itself. The wedding planning had been stressful for Rachel and her fiancé Marcus because their combined savings weren't sufficient for the celebration they'd envisioned. Rachel worked as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized advertising agency, earning $52,000 annually, while Marcus was a junior accountant at a corporate tax firm making $48,000. Their combined income was respectable but not substantial enough to fund the kind of wedding Rachel had been dreaming about since childhood. "We might have to scale back significantly," Rachel had told my mother during one of her weekly wedding planning updates. "The venue we want at the Riverside Country Club costs $18,000 for the ballroom rental, plus catering for 200 guests at $90 per person, plus gratuity, service charges, and taxes. That's over $35,000 just for the venue and food." The conversation had continued with Rachel listing additional expenses that were pushing their budget beyond their means. The photographer they wanted charged $8,500 for complete wedding day coverage plus engagement photos and a custom album. The live band, specializing in both contemporary hits and traditional Mexican music for Marcus's family, cost $6,200 for 4 hours of performance. The floral arrangements Rachel had selected, white roses, baby's breath, and cascading greenery for centerpieces, ceremony decorations, and bridal bouquet, totaled $4,800 from the premium florist who understood her vision. "Then there's my dress," Rachel had confided to my mother with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "I found the perfect one at that boutique in Beverly Hills, but it's $8,500 before alterations. Marcus thinks I should find something less expensive, but Mom, it's the dress I've been dreaming about. I look like a princess in it." The dress had been custom designed by a boutique known for creating gowns for celebrities and wealthy clients. It featured hand-sewn beading, imported French lace, and a cathedral-length train that created the fairy tale effect Rachel had always envisioned for her wedding day. But $8,500 was nearly 3 months of her take-home salary, making it an impossible luxury without external financial assistance. "We're looking at over $60,000 total," Rachel had admitted to my mother, "and that's before the rehearsal dinner, the wedding favors, Marcus's tuxedo, my shoes and jewelry, and the honeymoon in Hawaii. We have maybe $40,000 saved, and our parents can contribute another $10,000 combined. We're still $15,000 to $20,000 short. Too much for their budget, but well within my means." My consulting business had generated $480,000 in revenue the previous year, and my investment portfolio had grown to over $1.2 million through careful savings and strategic stock investments. $20,000 represented less than 2 weeks of my typical monthly income. Over the following weeks, I'd arranged for Rachel to receive several anonymous wedding gifts from various fictional sources that wouldn't raise suspicions about their origins. The first arrived as a letter from the Riverside Country Club Wedding Excellence Foundation, explaining that Rachel had been selected to receive a $12,000 venue credit based on her outstanding contributions to community marketing initiatives through her professional work. The foundation didn't exist, but I'd created convincing letterhead, established a temporary phone number that forwarded to my office, and researched enough details about Rachel's work projects to make the award seem legitimate. The country club was initially confused when Rachel called to inquire about the credit, but when I contacted them directly posing as the foundation's representative and provided immediate payment for the amount, they agreed to honor the arrangement. The second gift came from Harrison and Associates Photography, supposedly a high-end wedding photography company that was launching a marketing campaign featuring real couples with inspiring love stories. Rachel and Marcus were selected to receive complimentary wedding photography services in exchange for permission to use selected images in the company's promotional materials. Harrison and Associates didn't exist either, but I'd hired the photographer Rachel wanted, paid their full fee plus a bonus for participating in the elaborate deception, and arranged for all the services she'd requested while maintaining the fiction that it was a promotional opportunity rather than charity. The floral arrangements were covered by a wedding industry showcase program that supposedly selected couples to receive premium decorations in exchange for allowing the florist to photograph the results for their portfolio. Marcus's tuxedo and Rachel's accessories came from a newlywed couple contest sponsored by a fictional bridal magazine. By the time the wedding arrived, Rachel had everything she'd dreamed of, funded entirely by the cousin she planned to embarrass with jokes about my single status and modest lifestyle. The mysterious benefactors had covered every major expense, allowing Rachel to have her perfect wedding without the financial stress that had been keeping her awake at night for months. The wedding itself was undeniably beautiful. The Riverside Country Club's grand ballroom was elegantly decorated with white roses and crystal centerpieces that caught the light from 3 massive chandeliers suspended above the dance floor. Round tables seating 8 guests each were arranged around the perimeter of the room, each adorned with premium linens, fine china, and silverware that reflected the venue's reputation for luxury events. The ceremony had taken place in the club's garden pavilion, with Rachel walking down an aisle lined with rose petals while a string quartet played traditional wedding music. Marcus had tears in his eyes as he watched his bride approach in the custom gown that made her look like royalty, the dress she'd thought was financially impossible just months earlier. The 5-course dinner was expertly prepared and graciously served by a professional staff that anticipated guests' needs and maintained the elegant atmosphere Rachel had envisioned. Premium wine pairings accompanied each course, and the wedding cake, a 4-tier creation featuring hand-piped sugar flowers and imported Belgian chocolate, served as both dessert and centerpiece for the evening's celebration. But the most expensive element was Rachel's overall appearance: the custom dress, professional styling, imported shoes, and jewelry borrowed from a high-end boutique that had agreed to provide pieces for the fictional bridal magazine showcase. She looked absolutely stunning, glowing with happiness and confidence that came from knowing every detail of her celebration was exactly what she'd dreamed about. During the cocktail hour before dinner, I'd mingled quietly with family members who treated me with the kind of polite tolerance reserved for elderly relatives and disappointing cousins. The conversations were predictable and condescending, reflecting assumptions about my financial situation and life choices that were completely disconnected from reality. "Isabella, you look nice tonight," Aunt Sophia had said with genuine surprise, as if my ability to dress appropriately for formal events was unexpected. "Did you buy that dress specially for the wedding? It must have been expensive." The dress had cost $2,400 from a designer boutique, but I'd chosen it specifically because it was elegant without being ostentatious, sophisticated enough to be appropriate for an upscale wedding but not so elaborate as to draw attention or raise questions about how I could afford such luxury. "Yes, I wanted to look nice for Rachel's special day," I'd replied simply, not mentioning that the dress cost more than most people's monthly rent payment. "That's sweet that you made the effort," Uncle Carlos had added, his tone suggesting that formal attire was a significant financial stretch for someone in my supposed circumstances. "I know these formal events can be expensive for people on tight budgets." People on tight budgets. Carlos was describing my financial situation to me while standing in a ballroom I'd paid for, drinking wine I'd funded, eating appetizers I'd subsidized through the elaborate network of fictional sponsors and contests I'd created to make Rachel's dream wedding possible. But the cruelest comments came during dinner, when family members felt emboldened by alcohol and the celebratory atmosphere to share their honest opinions about my life choices and relationship status. The conversations were loud enough for surrounding tables to hear, creating a public forum for discussing my perceived failures and limitations. "Isabella, still no +1?" my cousin David had asked loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear. "You know, there's no shame in using dating apps. Even desperate people find matches eventually. Even desperate people." David was calling me desperate while eating a meal funded by my anonymous generosity. "Maybe she's too busy with her little computer hobby," Rachel had added from the head table, her voice carrying across the reception hall. "Some people prefer laptops to relationships." Little computer hobby. Rachel was dismissing my career while wearing a wedding dress I'd purchased, celebrating in a venue I'd rented, surrounded by flowers I'd arranged to be delivered. The laughter that followed Rachel's comment was the final straw. 200 guests were laughing at my expense, enjoying entertainment funded by the person they were mocking, and celebrating a wedding made possible by my anonymous support. I'd had enough. The band was taking a break between sets when I stood up from my assigned table in the back corner, the table where single relatives and distant family friends were seated to minimize their impact on the formal photographs and important conversations. I walked directly to the bandstand where the microphone stood on its stand, ignored the surprised murmurs from guests who couldn't imagine why quiet Isabella would be approaching the entertainment area. "Excuse me," I said to the band leader, "I'd like to make an announcement." He looked confused but handed me the microphone. The sound system carried my voice clearly across the ballroom, cutting through conversations and drawing attention from every table. "I have something to say," I announced, looking directly at Rachel's table where she sat with Marcus and both sets of parents. "Something all of you need to hear." The room fell silent with the kind of anticipatory tension that accompanies unexpected interruptions of formal celebrations. Wedding guests set down their drinks and turned toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. Some looked worried that I might be having some kind of emotional breakdown, while others seemed excited by the prospect of unscripted drama at an otherwise conventional celebration. "For the past 15 years," I began, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to reveal, "I've been listening to family members make jokes about my life, my career, and my choices. You've questioned my financial stability, mocked my single status, and suggested that I'm somehow failing at life because I don't meet your conventional definitions of success." Rachel's face went pale as she began to sense that this wasn't going to be a typical wedding toast. Several family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing that the evening was about to take an unexpected turn that might not reflect well on anyone involved. "Tonight, I'm going to tell you exactly who's been funding the dreams you've been celebrating, supporting the achievements you've been praising, and making possible the milestones you've been proud to share with friends and neighbors." The silence deepened as guests realized this wasn't going to be a congratulatory speech about the happy couple. Uncle Miguel loosened his tie, Aunt Carmen gripped her wine glass with white knuckles, and David looked around the room as if searching for an escape route. "Rachel, your beautiful wedding that everyone's been enjoying tonight? The $18,000 venue rental, the premium catering at $90 per person, the live band, the professional photography, your $8,000 custom dress? All paid for by anonymous donations that came from my little computer hobby that apparently doesn't pay the bills." The mathematical implications were staggering to guests who knew the cost of wedding celebrations. Rachel's mouth fell open as she calculated the total expenses and realized that her perfect wedding hadn't been funded by her savings, her parents' generosity, or various fictional contests and sponsors. It had been subsidized entirely by the cousin she'd been publicly mocking for months. The venue credit from the Riverside Country Club Wedding Excellence Foundation? I created that foundation specifically to pay for your reception. The complimentary photography from Harrison and Associates? I hired your photographer directly and created a fictional company to avoid embarrassing you with obvious charity. The floral showcase program, the bridal magazine contest, the industry partnerships that covered every major expense? All elaborate deceptions designed to give you the wedding of your dreams without forcing you to accept help from the family member you clearly consider unsuccessful. Marcus grabbed Rachel's hand as the full scope of my deception became clear. Their perfect wedding, the celebration they'd been enjoying, the luxury they'd been experiencing, the memories they'd been creating, had been made possible by someone they'd dismissed as financially struggling and professionally unsuccessful. "David," I continued, turning toward my cousin who'd called me desperate earlier in the evening, "your wedding 4 years ago when you couldn't afford the down payment for the reception venue? That mysterious small business development grant from the state government that covered your costs and allowed you to buy equipment for your landscaping business? There is no such grant program. I researched your business, created fictional documentation, and arranged for you to receive a check that covered both your wedding expenses and your professional development." David's confident smirk vanished completely as the implications of my revelation sank in. His wife Amanda grabbed his arm, her face reflecting the embarrassment of learning that their wedding, the celebration they'd been proud of, the achievement they'd been bragging about, had been secretly funded by the cousin they'd been treating as the family disappointment. The application process you went through, the requirements you met, the evaluation criteria that supposedly qualified you for assistance? I created all of it to make the funding seem legitimate while avoiding the awkwardness of direct family charity. You received $23,000 that allowed you to have the wedding you wanted and launch your business with proper equipment, all while believing you'd earned government recognition for your entrepreneurial potential. Uncle Carlos, when your restaurant was facing bankruptcy 3 years ago and you received that anonymous business investment with incredibly favorable terms? That was me, working through intermediaries to provide the capital you needed while contributing marketing expertise that helped transform Carlos's Cantina from a struggling neighborhood restaurant into the thriving business it is today. Carlos looked stunned, his fork suspended halfway between his plate and his mouth. The successful restaurant expansion, the increased revenue, the second location he'd been able to open, all made possible by the niece he'd been dismissing as financially irresponsible and professionally unsuccessful. The anonymous investor who supposedly specialized in restaurant marketing and understood family-owned establishments better than most industry professionals? I'd been consulting with restaurants for 8 years, helping them optimize their operations, improve their marketing effectiveness, and compete with corporate chains. Your success wasn't luck or mysterious external investment, it was strategic business development funded and guided by someone who understood exactly what your restaurant needed to thrive. I looked around the ballroom at family members who were beginning to understand the scope of my financial contributions to their major life events and professional achievements. The comfortable assumptions they'd made about my circumstances were crumbling as they realized that the family member they'd been pitying and mocking had been their anonymous benefactor for over a decade. Aunt Sophia, your medical bills that were mysteriously paid by a charitable foundation that nobody could identify? I created that foundation, registered it legally, and arranged for your $8,000 in treatment costs to be covered directly by the organization. The application process, the selection criteria, the gratitude you felt toward anonymous donors who understood the challenges facing teachers with medical emergencies? You were thanking me without knowing it. Sophia's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the ballroom floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the stunned silence. Her face was a mixture of embarrassment, gratitude, and confusion as she processed the revelation that her medical crisis had been resolved by the niece whose financial struggles she'd been discussing sympathetically for years. Over the past 15 years, I've spent over $340,000 helping family members achieve their goals, fund their celebrations, solve their financial crises, and build the lives they wanted. Money I earned through my successful software consulting business, the computer hobby that apparently doesn't pay the bills but somehow generated $480,000 in revenue last year alone. The revenue number hung in the air like a revelation that was completely rewriting everyone's understanding of family dynamics, financial relationships, and assumptions about success and failure. Guests who'd been making jokes about my modest lifestyle were realizing that I earned more than most of them combined. I own my apartment building outright, plus 3 rental properties in different neighborhoods that generate $8,400 monthly in passive income. My investment portfolio is worth over $1.2 million, growing consistently through careful financial planning and strategic stock investments. I drive an 8-year-old car not because I can't afford better, but because I prefer investing money in business growth, helping family members, and building long-term financial security rather than impressing people with expensive possessions. Aunt Carmen looked like she'd been physically struck by the revelation. Her assumptions about my financial limitations, her suggestions that I needed to be more realistic about my prospects, her comparisons between my modest lifestyle and Rachel's conventional success, all revealed as completely backward assessments based on superficial observations rather than actual understanding. I've remained single by choice, not because I'm desperate or unable to find relationships. I've focused on building financial independence, developing professional expertise, and supporting family members who apparently don't appreciate those contributions enough to treat me with basic respect or curiosity about my actual circumstances. The microphone felt lighter in my hand as I prepared to deliver the conclusion I'd been building toward for months of increasing frustration and mounting resentment. Rachel, I hope you and Marcus enjoy your perfect wedding. Consider it my final anonymous gift, the last time I'll fund celebrations for family members who use my personal life as entertainment for wedding guests. But from now on, my financial support comes with a requirement for basic human decency and respectful treatment. I paused to look around the ballroom at 200 stunned faces, family members who were realizing that their assumptions about success and failure had been completely incorrect, and wedding guests who were witnessing a family drama that would be discussed for years. To everyone who's been making jokes about my life, questioning my choices, and suggesting that I need to be more realistic about my prospects, you've been mocking the person who's been making your achievements possible. The family bank is now closed to anyone who thinks ridiculing their anonymous benefactor is appropriate entertainment. I set the microphone back on its stand with deliberate care, the sound system carrying the soft click throughout the ballroom's perfect acoustics. Then I walked toward the exit, my elegant dress rustling against the marble floor, leaving behind 200 stunned wedding guests and a bride who was finally understanding the true cost of her cruelty. The silence followed me across the ballroom and into the lobby, where the only sounds were my heels clicking against polished floors and the distant murmur of shocked conversations beginning to resume behind the closed doors of the reception hall. The parking lot was quiet and cool compared to the heated tension of the ballroom I'd just left behind. I sat in my modest 8-year-old Honda Civic, the car that had been used as evidence of my financial struggles by family members, who had no idea it was a deliberate choice to maintain a low profile while building wealth, and felt lighter than I had in years. My phone started buzzing with text messages before I'd even left the venue parking lot, family members reaching out with reactions that ranged from shock and embarrassment to apologies and desperate attempts at reconciliation. "Isabella, please come back. We need to talk." "Rachel, I had no idea. I'm so sorry." "David, you've been incredibly generous and we've been terrible." "Aunt Carmen." The messages continued throughout my drive home, family members apologizing, explaining, and asking for forgiveness. But the most important message came from my mother, who'd witnessed the entire revelation from her table near the front of the ballroom. "I'm proud of you for finally standing up for yourself. You've been more generous than they deserved, and they needed to know the truth." Over the following weeks, family members reached out individually to apologize and thank me for years of anonymous support they'd never recognized or appreciated. The conversations were awkward but necessary, forcing everyone to confront their assumptions and treatment patterns. Rachel called 3 days after her honeymoon to have the most honest conversation we'd ever shared as adults. "Isabella, I don't know how to apologize adequately," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You paid for my dream wedding while I was making jokes about your life. That's unforgivable." "It's forgiven," I replied. "But it can't continue. I'm happy to help family members who treat me with respect, but I won't fund the lifestyles of people who use me as entertainment." "I understand completely," Rachel said. "And I want you to know that Marcus and I want to pay you back for the wedding expenses. It might take us a while, but we want to make this right." The offer was appreciated but unnecessary. I'd spent the money knowing I might never see it returned, and the revelation had been worth far more than the financial cost. 6 months later, family dynamics had shifted completely. Instead of making jokes about my single status and modest lifestyle, relatives began consulting me about financial planning, business development, and investment strategies. My expertise was finally recognized and respected rather than dismissed and mocked. Uncle Carlos invited me to become a silent partner in his restaurant expansion, offering equity participation in exchange for business guidance and capital investment. Aunt Sophia asked for advice about her daughter's college funding strategy. David requested mentorship for a business idea he'd been developing. The relationships weren't based on apology or guilt, they were built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation for different types of expertise and success. A year after the wedding revelation, I was invited to speak at a conference for women entrepreneurs about building financial independence and managing family relationships while achieving business success. The most important lesson I learned, I told the audience, wasn't about money or business strategy. It was about setting boundaries with people who take your generosity for granted while treating you poorly. The applause was enthusiastic, and afterward, several women approached me with their own stories about being underestimated by family members who couldn't see past conventional success markers. 2 years later, I started a foundation that provides genuine anonymous support to women entrepreneurs who need capital to launch or expand their businesses. The recipients never know my identity, but they do know that someone believes in their potential enough to invest in their dreams. The foundation has funded 43 women-owned businesses across 12 industries, generating over $2 million in economic impact and creating hundreds of jobs. It's the kind of anonymous generosity I'd always practiced with family members, but directed toward people who appreciate the support rather than mocking the source. Rachel and I have rebuilt our relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. She's become one of my closest friends and biggest supporters, often introducing me as the cousin who taught me that generosity shouldn't require gratitude, but basic human decency should never be optional. The lesson I learned wasn't about proving family members wrong or seeking recognition for anonymous generosity. It was about understanding that respect is a prerequisite for any healthy relationship, and that supporting people who don't value your contributions is ultimately destructive to everyone involved. My financial support had enabled family members to achieve their goals, but it had also enabled their disrespectful behavior by removing consequences for treating me poorly. The wedding mic drop wasn't just about revealing my contributions, it was about establishing boundaries that made future relationships possible. What's your family mic drop moment? Share below if you've ever shocked relatives who had no idea they were biting the hand that feeds them.